Welcome back to the Cheeky Commodore Gamer channel, and if you're new here, I mostly look back at Commodore 64 and Amiga games, the classics, the oddities, and the stuff I still play decades later. In the last video, we covered Zzap 64's first Gold Medals and Sizzlers from 1985, the classics, the surprises, and a few awards that still raise an eyebrow now. Airwolf. But now we're into 1986, Zzap's first full calendar year, where the Commodore 64 library pretty much exploded in every direction. I'll try to keep the video tight and look at what each game was, why Zzap rated it, and whether it was Sizzler or Gold Medal worthy. But I suppose, as always, this will be a subjective decision. Hit the like button, subscribe, and let's dive straight into January 1986. Koronis Rift opens 1986 with Lucasfilm Games, and it links nicely back to Rescue on Fractalus from the 1985 awards. Zzap, like many of us at the time, clearly saw Lucasfilm as one of the companies pushing the Commodore 64 technically, and they definitely did just that. You're driving across the planet Koronis, searching wrecks, sending out your robot, collecting ancient technology, and working out which shields, weapons and modules are worth fitting to your rover. Yes, there is shooting, but also this incredibly impressive bit of animation with the robot fellow here. Superb. The 3D landscape was the big showpiece, giving it that lonely alien planet vibe. It does take a bit of getting into, but it's definitely worth investing your time into learning because Zzap's 96% was justified. Technical, strange, and a very strong start to 1986. Ballblazer keeps the Lucasfilm run going, but after Koronis Rift, this is a completely different beast. It's a futuristic one-on-one action sport, played in split screen with two rotofoils chasing a ball across a grid, while the goals move about and get harder to hit. It's not as complicated as it looks either. You just grab the ball, line up the shot, and try not to get smashed out of the way before you score. But once it starts moving, especially in two-player mode, it becomes fast, aggressive, and surprisingly addictive. Zzap loved the simplicity, the speed, and the head-to-head competition, and you could see why. The computer opponent was no pushover either, so if you remember being made to look hopeless, you were not alone. Zzap gave it 98%, which still makes the missing gold medal feel odd, but we'll explain why later. As a Sizzler, it is excellent. As a 98% Lucasfilm game, it always makes me wonder why it was one badge grade too short. Robin of the Wood is a personal one for me, and I included it in my 50 Essential Commodore 64 Games video, as I have always had a soft spot for it. Thankfully, Zzap also agreed with me. It was Odin computer graphics doing that very British arcade adventure thing. A flip screen forest, Sherwood atmosphere, guards, bags of gold, arrows, lethal hedgehogs for some strange reason, and a map you'd probably need to make yourself, unless you enjoy being lost roaming around a forest for half the evening. Robin's animation was great. It might look simple now, but it just seemed to flow really well across the screen. Fred Gray's melodic music, although repetitive, gave the forest a real mood. And the whole thing had that slightly hypnotic quality where you keep wandering just to see what you will find next. The Ent, the Druid, the Witch, the Bishop, the King. It all gives the forest a sort of unique personality. It can be repetitive, and yes, the hedgehogs are more dangerous than half the sheriff's men, which still feels ridiculous. But as a Sizzler, I absolutely get it. Not a technical showpiece like the Lucasfilm games, but full of that 80s charm, atmosphere, and Commodore 64 character. The Temple of Apshai trilogy brings January into old-school dungeon crawling, and honestly, about time we saw something like this in the Sizzler list. This is clearly from the early days of computer role-playing, and Zzap's review makes a point of Epic's repackaging Temple of Apshai, Upper Reaches of Apshai, and Curse of Ra into one much better value release. You create or load a character, head into the dungeon, and deal with rooms, treasure, monsters, stats, wounds, fatigue, and all the usual ways a fantasy adventure can drag you into its world. It is keyboard controlled, slower paced, and definitely not for everyone. But for genre fans, it is a proper old classic. I mostly remember my character falling into pieces when he died, probably because that happened most of the times I played. The C64 was not just shooters, sports games and arcade conversions, it could handle deeper adventures too. Zzap's 90% feels fair. Not flashy, not fast, but a serious package for players who wanted something with a bit more commitment. January 1986 is a strong start, and as it turns out, the gold medal was not really missing, it was just printed wrong. Some of you might have already jumped in the comments to highlight it, but yeah, Zzap later admitted that Ballblazer should have had the gold medal, and even gave us readers a little cutout badge to fix it ourselves, which was just typical Zzap. A superb magazine that didn't take things too serious, in all fairness. Lucasfilm basically owned the issue, with Koronis Rift giving us ambitious 3D exploration, and Ballblazer delivering fast, split-screen competition with a massive 98%. Robin of the Wood adds the British arcade adventure style, Fred Gray music, and dangerous hedgehogs, while Temple of Apshai Trilogy slows things down with dungeon crawling, stats, and keyboard commands. For me, Robin of the Wood was the standout, and January definitely gave us a great start to 1986. But February is not where the gold medals returned, it was where Zzap remembered to print them. Fight Night is February's boxing sizzler, but this one felt less like a serious boxing sim and more like a big, daft cartoon scrap. The main attraction is the Boxer Construction Kit, where you can build your own fighter from different parts and then watch your carefully assembled champion either win glory or get knocked about the place. Zzap clearly loved this one though, and yeah, the Boxer sprites are large, colourful and full of character. I suppose the whole thing had a lot more whimsy and humour than something like Barry McGuigan World Championship Boxing, but the actual fighting was simpler. Looking back, 93% might be a bit generous if you judge it purely as a boxing game, not a patch on Barry McGuigan, in my own personal opinion. But as a fun, characterful Commodore 64 release with replay value from making your own fighters, I can see why it caught Zzap's eye. Not the deepest boxing game on the system, but definitely one with personality. Boulder is February's first gold medal, and I can see why Zzap went for it, even if I personally find it hard to enjoy for more than 30 seconds without wanting to leave the room. Seriously, I just cannot get anywhere with it. Good job you start with loads of lives, or this would have been back at the shop after 5 minutes. Before I get too salty, the idea is brilliant. You're a bouncing tennis ball, travelling up a vertically scrolling course, landing on safe grey platforms, avoiding hazards, using arrows for longer jumps, and try not to drop into the abyss, which is where I usually ended up. Oh, it puts you in the bloody level. Zzap loved it, and plenty of you probably did too. The scrolling is smooth, the parallax effect is impressive, and it looked very different from most platform games of the time. But good grief, it is tough. One bad landing, one enemy in the wrong place, one badly judged bounce, and you were gone. Some people love that. I mostly felt bullied by a tennis ball. So yes, I understand the 97% gold medal. Clever, polished and distinctive. But for me, it is definitely one I admire more than I enjoy playing. The Eidolon gives February another Lucasfilm gold medal. And by this point, they are basically dominating the early part of 1986. After Rescue on Fractalus, Koronis Rift and Ballblazer, this is another game built around that fractal-style technology. But this time, we were inside eerie underground caves rather than flying over alien terrain. It's all wonderfully odd, travelling through the caverns of your own mind in a strange machine called the Eidolon, collecting energy spheres, dealing with huge animated creatures and trying to get past dragons guarding the deeper levels. Zzap were clearly impressed by the scale of the monsters and the atmosphere, and you can see why. For 1986, those big cave creatures were pretty awesome. It's probably not the Lucasfilm game I'd rush back to first, and like a few of their titles, it can leave you wondering what the hell is going on without the manual. But as a technical, strange and atmospheric Commodore 64 game, the gold medal was deserved. Revs was February's serious racing entry, and I have a lot of respect for this one, even though it is exactly the sort of game that normally tested my patience. I was more of a Pit Stop 2 sort of gamer, so Jeff Crammond's Formula 3 sim quickly taught me that this was not about flinging the car around and hoping for the best. You had braking points, gears, throttle control, racing lines and wing settings. Meanwhile, I was usually just trying to complete a lap without leaving the track like an idiot. Zzap pointed out that it looks fairly plain at first, but once you were behind the wheel, the realism was pretty wild for a 1986 C64 racer. Silverstone and Brands Hatch had proper attention to corners, bumps and cambers, which was seriously impressive. It takes time to tame, but that is the reward. Once you start getting round cleanly, Revs becomes a pretty awesome game for its time. Zzap's 96% makes sense, difficult, demanding, but one of the key C64 racing sims. February is another strong month. Would you agree? Zzap was right back with gold medal badges after the short blip. Fight Night brought a colourful cartoon boxing game, even if 93% felt a bit generous next to Barry McGuigan. Boulder got that gold medal absolutely brutal. I respect it, but that tennis ball caused me emotional damage. The Eidolon gave Lucasfilm another big early 1986 moment, with eerie caves and that technical ambition that ran through Rescue 1 Fractalus, Koronis Rift and Ballblazer. And Revs showed Zzap had real time for serious simulation. So February proved how broad 1986 was already becoming. Boxing, bouncing, cave exploration and racing all in one issue. For me, the Eidolon was the most interesting gold medal, but Revs might be the one I respect most, retrospectively, even if I was shite at driving at the time. So now, let's have a look at what March 1986 brought us. Mercenary, a gold medal where there's not much argument from me on this one whatsoever. You crash on the planet Targ, your ship is wrecked, and the job is simple enough, you just need to find a way off the planet. The clever bit was how much freedom the game actually gave you to roam around. You could explore, trade, steal, fly, walk, use lifts, wander through underground areas, and slowly work out how this strange little world fits together. The wireframe 3D looks basic now, but in 1986 this must have felt huge. Benson, your computer, also gives the game a bit of dry personality, which helps when you are completely lost. Zzap compared it to Elite, but Mercenary had its own thing going on. It's more of an open world puzzle box, and for a Commodore 64 game, that was seriously impressive. A 98% gold medal that felt absolutely deserved. Ark of Yesod follows on from Nodes of Yesod, which we covered in the 1985 awards, so this is Odin or Thor on the label here, heading back into that underground arcade adventure style. It feels very familiar. You're exploring, collecting crystals, dealing with odd creatures, digging through passages, and trying to work out where everything fits. The graphics are improved, the backdrops look sharper, and the music has that catchy, slightly spacey feel, but it's not a massive reinvention. If you liked Nodes, there is a good chance you will settle into this. If you wanted something radically different, it might feel like you've been sent down the same hole with a new map. Zzap gave it 91%, and I can see why. It's well made, atmospheric and challenging, but for me, it's more of a solid follow-up than one of 1986's essential moments. Which one did you prefer? Nodes or Ark? HardBall is another sign that Zzap were clearly enjoying American sports games in 1986, so I can only assume baseball fever had reached Ludlow. It certainly hadn't reached where I'm from in the northwest, because none of my mates had the foggiest idea how to play it. We had Rounders, but I doubt Rounders Simulator was ever troubling the Sizzler badge. I'll be honest, my own knowledge of baseball is dangerously thin. To me, it was Rounders with more chewing, more caps, and a lot more standing around, but HardBall was actually a very fun C64 game. The behind-the-picture view gives the batting and pitching a proper TV-style feel, and the large animated players made it look more convincing than many sports games of the time. There is pitching, batting, fielding, and team management, so it's not just swinging wildly and hoping. Zzap gave it 93%, and I see why. HardBall made baseball accessible, playable, and somehow interesting to people who still probably could not explain half the rules. Borrowed Time brings March into detective adventure territory, and this one has that noir-style Activision presentation that immediately looks a bit different from the usual fantasy caves and space corridors. You play private detective Sam Harlow, trying to work out who wants you dead, which is always a nice relaxing way to start an adventure game. The graphics are a big part of the appeal, as they gave it atmosphere straight away, and Zzap clearly liked the parser too, because you could type commands properly or use the joystick-driven word system if you wanted a bit of help. It's still a text and graphic adventure though, so patience is required, along with the ability to read carefully and not to accuse the game every time you miss something obvious. I can see why it got 90%. Not a game for the quick blast crowd, but stylish, moody, and a good sizzler for adventure fans. What did you guys think? Let us know in the comments. Germany 1985 takes us back into serious wargame territory, and after Theatre Europe in 1985, Zzap clearly had time for this sort of thing. This is SSI's fictional Warsaw-Pact attack against NATO in Central Europe, so nobody was loading it up for a quick 2-minute joystick bash. Zzap gave it 97%, which is huge, but you could see why if turn-based strategy is your thing. The review points to 2 scenarios, different unit types, terrain, supply, smoke screens, artillery, airstrikes, and all the details that either make these games fascinating or quietly terrifying, depending on your patience level. And in the mid-80s, the Cold War setting obviously carried a different weight. It wasn't on my radar as a 5 or 6-year-old kid, so this is one I respect more now than I would have naturally played at the time. You needed maps, planning, concentration, and probably a quiet room. But as a serious C64 war game, Zzap clearly thought Germany 1985 was right near the top of the pile. If you played it properly back then, I'd be genuinely interested to hear your memories. Uridium, on the other hand, was a game I played the death out of as a kid. It was also one of 1986's biggest games as a whole, and one of Andrew Braybrook's career-defining Commodore 64 games. After Paradroid had made such an impact in 1985, this felt like another reminder that Braybrook understood how to make games look sharp, move quickly, and still feel completely under control. What a superbly talented developer he was, actually. Just flawless games, to be fair. The metallic dreadnoughts, the sideways scrolling, the ship flip, the tight movement. Everything about Uridium was polished to perfection. It's not just another shoot 'em up, it was one where you'd need to fly cleanly, react quickly, and stay composed, because the game punished sloppy control. And you'd crash headlong into something in no time if you wasn't paying attention. Zzap gave it 94%, which is very strong indeed. I could probably argue it deserved even more compared to other games which rated higher. For me, this is one of the most important Sizzlers of the year. Fast, stylish, demanding, and unmistakably Commodore 64. Still, tough as nails though. I think we'll all agree, March was a seriously strong issue. Mercenary got the gold medal headline with a massive score of 98%, but for me, Uridium was the arcade monster in the issue. Polished, fast, unforgiving, and still one of Andrew Braybrook's defining games. HardBall proved Zzap was still loving the American sports titles. Ark of Yesod carrying on that Odin-style arcade adventure thread. Borrowed Time bringing in detective adventure atmosphere. And Germany 1985 showing that serious war games were still getting respect. But April was another month where Zzap kept the gold medal badge off the page. Not because the issue was weak, I suppose none of the upcoming games kicked the door down and demanded it. But that's for you to decide as we check it out now. Zoids is based on the Japanese Tomy franchise with those animal-style mechanical creatures, dinosaurs, insects, mammals, and all that sort of thing. So this could have easily been a basic toy license with a few robots stomping about. Instead, the C64 game goes in a much stranger direction. You control a Zoid through icons, scanners, missiles, railguns, jamming systems, and map screens, trying to recover pieces of Zoidzilla and take on the red Zoids. Zoids. So no, it's not just big robot shoots things, there is a lot more going on, sometimes too much if the manual is not nearby. It's difficult, odd, and not especially welcoming at first, but once it starts to click, there is a clever action strategy game underneath. And then there is Rob Hubbard's music, which is absolutely superb. moody, driving, and doing a lot of work in making the whole thing feel bigger than the screen. Zzap gave it 96%. Personally, I found it confusing at times, but looking back, it was far more ambitious than a simple toy license had any right to be. Spellbreaker is another Infocom text adventure, and because we've already covered quite a few adventures in the Zzap Award videos, I'll keep this one short and sweet. This was the third and final game in the Enchanter series, following Enchanter and Sorcerer, and it was definitely not aimed at anyone wanting a gentle first adventure. Infocom rated it as advanced, and by all accounts that was not them showing off. This one could be seriously tough. There's no flashy graphics, it's all writing, puzzles, logic, patience, and the parser doing the heavy lifting. If you already liked Infocom, Zzap's 92% makes sense. If you hated typed commands, Spellbreaker was never going to be the game that changed your mind. A strong sizzler for adventure fans, but definitely not one for people who enjoy having their brain quietly folded in half. Questron brings April into fantasy role-playing territory, and this is very much one for you guys who love those longer adventure-type games. It's an SSI RPG, with towns, dungeons, monsters, character growth, gambling, banks, guards who remember when you have been up to no good, and that slow climb from useless peasant to someone who might actually survive 5 minutes. It clearly takes inspiration from Ultima, and even the review history around it tends to bring that comparison up. But Questron does have its own lighter, more playful vibe. There are minigames, casinos, crimes you probably shouldn't be committing in the first place, and enough systems to keep RPG gamers busy for quite a bit. For me, this was another one I respected more than I naturally gravitated towards, primarily as it was disc only, and I only had a dataset as a kid. Ah, poor me. I didn't play it fully until years later, but what I can say is that it's a deep, role-playing game, for which Zzap's 91% probably makes sense. A solid sizzler for you guys who thrived on commitment to adventure games, maps, and probably a handy notebook nearby. Field of Fire is another SSI game, so April is definitely not short on games for the serious strategy crowd. This time we are in Second World War tactical territory, commanding Easy Company through a campaign that starts in North Africa and eventually heads toward Aachen in Germany. So you can expect squads, cover, machine guns, mortars, line of fire, morale, and the slight matter of trying to keep your men alive and in one piece. Zzap's 96% shows how much respect they had for this kind of game when it delivered. For me, also, this is another one I respect, and it was quite interesting to play, even if it might feel a little too simple now for hardcore wargame fans. But if you fancied something different on the C64, Field of Fire could easily be the sort of SSI title you never knew you wanted. So then, April was a quieter month for big headline names. Zoids was helped massively by the license and that superb Rob Hubbard music doing half the job on its own. Spellbreaker keeps Infocom in the awards. Questron gave RPG fans a decent fantasy adventure. And then Field of Fire gave SSI another strong strategy. Two games not exactly on my radar, but ones I can definitely respect the high scores for. The big question was if Zzap were right not to give a gold medal. I think so, because there are good games here, but nothing quite has the weight of Mercenary from the month before, which mattered, because if every decent month gets a gold medal, the badge would have lost its worth. May 1986 kept the 1986 variety going with a brutally precise budget classic, one of the strangest gold medals of the year, another American sports pick, and a role-playing game whose reputation has only grown with time. Thrust is one I covered in my Commodore 64 budget games video, so check that out if you get the chance. I'll link it in the description. It deserves a place there because for £1.99 this was a ridiculous amount of game. The idea is simple but incredibly addictive. Pilot your little ship through underground caverns, fight gravity, collect a power pod and get the hell out of there without smashing yourself into the scenery. Controlling the little bugger is the challenge. You're constantly fighting momentum, making tiny adjustments, and once that pod is dragging behind you, it suddenly feels like you have attached a caravan to a paper aeroplane. The graphics are basic, but I'm not knocking them, because a game this addictive doesn't need to be flashy, and Rob Hubbard's title music is superb. So good in fact, I've used it across this whole segment. Zzap gave it 94%. It's hard, skillful, and occasionally finger-twisting, but it's also one of the best examples of a legendary budget title with one clear idea executed brilliantly. Big thumbs up. Alter Ego is May's Gold Medal, and this is one of the strangest top awards of the year. There were separate male and female versions, and I actually played the female version on a livestream, which got interesting. This is a life simulation by psychologist Peter J. Favaro, where you make choices from infancy onwards and watch how they shape your personality, relationships, work, money, marriage, family, and eventually old age. It looks simple, but the writing is the whole point. Some choices are funny, some are uncomfortable, as they were in the female version played live to my followers. Ooh. It's a game that can make you reflect on your entire existence if you properly get into it. Okay, maybe not, but if Zzap can give it 98%, then I can talk some bollocks about it too. Deal? It's not flashy by any means, and it's barely a game in the usual sense, but it's original, absorbing, and genuinely completely different from almost anything else in this list. A very bold gold medal, and a game I think you should all experience at least once. Super Bowl continues Zzap's love affair with American sports games, and honestly, again, what was going on in Ludlow in 1986? I can only assume someone in the office had a Chicago Bears jacket and was refusing to take it off. To be fair, American football was gaining a bit of traction here in the UK around this time, but the actual rules? Still mostly a mystery to me. Helmets, touchdowns, lots of stopping, big lads running into each other. That was about my level. The game itself mixes action and tactics, letting you choose players, pass, run, and control players during the move. Zzap liked the two-player side and the tactical setup, although even their own review admits the computer was a bit easy, and the graphics and sound were hardly spectacular. So 90% feels generous now. I can see why it scraped into Sizzler territory at the time, but compared with Thrust and Alter Ego, this is definitely one of May's lighter picks. Again, these are only my subjective views based on these original scores. Let me know what you thought of this one in the comments. Ultima IV is one people have been asking me to cover on the channel for a while, so I'm glad we finally highlight it here. And even with Zzap giving it only 90%, this is probably the most historically important game in May's issue. It wasn't just another fantasy RPG where you kill monsters, grab treasures and slowly turn into a walking weapons catalogue. Ultima IV was built around becoming the Avatar, which means learning the 8 virtues, talking to people, paying attention, taking notes, and understanding that your behaviour actually matters. Lie, steal, run away too often, or act like a complete menace. The game picks up on all of this. It was deep, demanding, and absolutely the sort of thing you needed time, patience, manuals, and again, probably a notebook for. Being disc-based as well, this was not really part of my original dataset childhood in the same way as the budget games were, but looking back, its reputation makes absolute total sense. Zzap's 90% is strong, but with hindsight, you could actually argue it deserved even more. A major sizzler, and one of the most significant RPGs on the C64. May is a strange one, because the most historically important game probably wasn't the gold medal. Thrust is pure skill and budget brilliance. Super Bowl keeps Zzap's American sports interest going, and Ultima IV is the one whose reputation has only grown with time. But as a Zzap award in the moment, Alter Ego, I guess, sort of makes sense. It was original, unexpected, and about as far from another space shooter as you could get. June is a packed month of arcade adventures, fighting, strategy, budget ambition, isometric exploration, and one gold medal that is still very easy to defend. So we'll keep moving, because if we deep dive every game here, we'll need our own Christmas special. Cauldron received a Sizzler back in 1985, and I already thought that was brutal, but Cauldron II was definitely 10 times tougher, and probably the reason one of my prized zipstick joysticks got launched into my brother, or the wall, or whatever stood in its path. You're not the witch this time, you're the pumpkin, which in itself sounds fecking daft, bouncing around a huge haunted castle. collecting items and trying to break the witch's spell without losing your patience, your lives, and your sanity. Visually, I get why Zzap loved it. Palace Software gave it a really strong identity with the spooky rooms, candles, spiders, skeletons, the witch's cackle when you died, and a castle that feels majorly hostile. The problem, as we are all fully aware of, was the bouncing. It is original, yes, but every screen was a fight with gravity, enemies, platforms, and your own temper. So 94%? I understand the praise for the look, sound and atmosphere, but as a game to actually play for long stretches, I'd give it more like 70%. It's definitely memorable, I'll give it that, but comfortable to play? Not for a second. Starquake is one I remember very fondly, although my strongest memory is actually playing it at a friend's house on his ZX Spectrum. I used to map out each screen individually on post-it notes, which probably looked less like game planning and more like I was trying to solve a burglary case. It's classic arcade adventure stuff where you control Blob, or biologically operated being, trying to stabilise an unstable planet by finding scattered core pieces across a massive 512 screen world. You can use teleporters, elevators, temporary platforms, security cards, hoverpads, and the Cheops pyramid to swap unwanted items. There's loads going on, but it still feels playable rather than completely overwhelming. The annoying part was that the Spectrum teleport codes were different from the Commodore 64 version, so I couldn't even cheat efficiently. Typical. Still, Starquake's a great game. Colour, strong exploration, and a real sense of scale. Zzap's 93% feels fair to me, a great Sizzler, and one of those games where mapping it was half the fun. International Karate arrived after Way of the Exploding Fist had already made karate games a serious attraction on whatever computer you were playing on at the time, so the comparisons were always going to follow it around. But when I first played this, I could instantly feel the difference. Archer McLean's System 3 fighter was faster, sharper and more responsive, without that slightly slidey feeling you could get from some fighting games on the C64. The animation is smooth, the fighters feel solid, and the backdrops gave it that globe-trotting martial arts flavour, even if the basic idea is still two blokes travelling the world to kick the crap out of each other in front of famous landmarks. Rob Hubbard, yes, once again. The Sid Chip God adds music that increased the appeal of the game a massive amount as well, alongside the thuds, grunts and little rustles of the karate suits. IK Plus would later push the formula even further. But this first implementation was amazing back in 1986. It was slick, competitive and very playable, especially with two players. Zzap gave it 91% and I think that's fair. Not quite a gold medal for me, but absolutely a strong Sizzler, and one of the Commodore 64's key one-on-one fighting games. Spellbound brings Magic Knight back after Finders Keepers, and for a £2.99 Mastertronic release, this was a serious amount of game for the pocket money I was given back in 1986. It mixed arcade adventure movement with object puzzles, character interaction, spells, and the Windimation command system, where actions are selected through windows and menus rather than typed in like a traditional adventure. It's clever, ambitious, and a game I really got my teeth into as a kid. There's a lot to keep track of though. Magic Knight's condition, the other characters, the objects, the spells, and the stubborn logic of what the game expected you to do next. As a young kid, I probably loved the idea more than the actual progress I made. The Rob Hubbard music deserves a mention as well. Surprise, surprise, Zzap only gave sound 67%, saying that Rob Hubbard assaults the ears once more. Were they having a lover's tiff? That baffled me while researching this, because I'm sure plenty of you remember that tune very fondly. Alas, Zzap's 94% and Sizzler award instantly redeemed it. For sheer value and ambition, Spellbound is one of the clearest examples of a budget game feeling much bigger than its price tag. Doomdark's Revenge was Mike Singleton going even bigger after Lords of Midnight. Zzap, and probably a lot of us guys, were definitely still impressed by the scale of it all. This is fantasy strategy with characters, armies, recruitment, movement, alliances, and a world that feels enormous. I remember playing the first one, Lords of Midnight, for the first time, and remembering that it was an achievement that I'd properly worked out which direction I was facing. That was before I even understood what to do in the first place, but I'm so glad I persevered. because that and this sequel was superb indeed. You're dealing with Sheriff, the Heartstealer, and in this game, Morkin has been kidnapped, Luxor is back in trouble, and the whole thing has that grand, slightly intimidating quality. The review mentions 6,144 locations, 48,000 screen views, 128 characters, and plenty of objects, which is a ridiculous scale for a Commodore 64 game when you think about it. It'll ask more of you than most games in this video, to be fair. You have to explore, recruit, judge character loyalties, and accept that half the battle is understanding the world itself. Zzap gave it 95%, but no gold medal. But what we all know is that it's a deep, ambitious, and absolutely superb fantasy epic. Big thumbs up. Kentilla is another text-heavy adventure, so I won't go too deep here because I cover it more in my budget Commodore 64 games video. Even so, for £1.99 this was a very respectable effort from Mastertronic. It mixes graphics with text input, gives you a decent amount to explore, and has far more atmosphere than you might expect from such a cheap release. The big extra touch is, wait for it, yes, the Rob Hubbard soundtrack, which gives the game a real identity and is probably the thing many people remember first. As with a lot of adventures like this, patience helps, and so does a willingness to prepare for some head-scratching moments and being stuck for a while in one place. Zzap gave it 90%, which just gets into Sizzler territory. Fair enough really. Not one of June's biggest headliners, but a strong budget adventure all the same. Spindizzy is June's gold medal, and this one is going to get me in trouble, because yes, it is clever, yes, it is distinctive, and yes, technically, it is a very impressive Commodore 64 game, but 98%? Come on! You guide Gerald through a huge isometric world, mapping screens, collecting jewels, managing time, changing viewpoint, and trying to control momentum without launching yourself into oblivion every few seconds. It has that Marble Madness kind of precision, but stretched into a much bigger exploration game. On paper, I understand exactly why Zzap were impressed. The issue is that I found Spindizzy absolutely infuriating, which is why it ended up in my brutal Commodore 64 games video. The controls, the time pressure, the narrow paths, the constant feeling that one tiny mistake had ruined everything. It is brilliantly designed torture, depending on your patience level. So yes, I can defend it as a gold medal. It is original, ambitious, and technically strong, but 98% still feels ridiculous to me, and I know some of you will be shouting at the screen already. So go on then, tell me in the comments whether Spindizzy is a masterpiece or whether Zzap briefly lost all sense of mercy. Fairlight closes June with another isometric adventure, though this one is slower, moodier, and far less arcade-like than Spindizzy, which isn't a bad thing. You play as Isvar, trapped in a castle, searching for the Book of Light while moving objects, solving puzzles, and try not to get battered by the locals. The appeal is the atmosphere, and the way the rooms feel like real spaces, with objects you can push, carry, stack, and use. For 1986, that was ambitious. The downside is the pace. On the C64 it can feel very slow, and I'm sure the version I had as a kid was buggy, or at least it felt that way. I guess that was the case with a lot of isometric style games, which were ahead of the time really. I hate to admit, they seem to work better on the Specky. Still, Zzap's 90% made sense for the ambition alone, but this is one for patient explorers, not quick blast players. June was a stacked month, with Spindizzy as the obvious headline somehow. Clever, distinctive and technically impressive, sure, even if 98% still feels like the sort of score that should have included a free stress ball. Elsewhere, International Karate brought slick one-on-one fighting. Starquake and Spellbound somehow showed how strong arcade adventures were. Doomdog's Revenge went big on strategy. And Fairlight added another atmospheric isometric world. Then there's Cauldron II, memorable mainly for proving that a bouncing pumpkin could ruin your evening. So June is strong, varied and slightly exhausting. And July doesn't exactly calm things down. Zzap keeps the awards flowing, but this time the spotlight shifts to one game in particular, a C64 classic that absolutely earns its moment. Leaderboard is a big one for me because this was the first game where I really learned how golf games worked, playing it with my brother on the C64. Choose the club, aim the shot, judge the power, time the snap, then watch the ball sail beautifully into the water while pretending that was always the plan. The funny thing is, I am still playing golf games today on the PS5, and the basic idea has barely changed. Modern games have more courses, better physics, swing options, cameras, career modes, and all the technical detail you could want, but the core loop is still there. Pick your shot, control the swing, read the conditions, and hope you have not completely misjudged it. For 1986, Leaderboard got so much of that right. It was clean, playable, competitive, and surprisingly tense for a game about golf. Zzap gave it 97%, and I think that still feels fair. A brilliant sports game, and one that helped define how computer golf would work for years. Boulder Dash 3 arrives after we already covered plenty of Boulder Dash in the 1985 video, and I have to admit I've never been the biggest fan personally. I respect the design, but the whole dig, dodge, collect and accidentally ruin everything in 2 seconds loop never fully grabbed me. As I said last time, I was more into the very rudimentary 20 tons by August Press, and by this point I was probably all bouldered out. This third game keeps the same core idea, but moves it into a space theme, which not everyone loved. Some liked the change, others felt it lost something from the earlier games. I've also seen comments about certain caves being badly designed, with some reportedly impossible on higher difficulty levels, which doesn't exactly help its case, but then again, completely subjective as always. Zzap gave it 93%, so they clearly felt the formula still had life in it. For Boulder Dash fans, fair enough. For me, it's a solid Sizzler, rather than one of 1986's major talking points. Good, clever, familiar, and still perfectly capable of making you feel like the entire cave collapsed, purely out of spite. Were you a fan, or were you bouldered out as well? Hez Games is probably better known to many of us as Go for the Gold, the Americana budget release. Either way, for £2.99, it was a multi-event sports package clearly aimed at anyone who fancied a bit of epic-styled competition without paying full price. What helped it stand out is that it's not just pure joystick punishment. Yes, there is still some waggling, and yes, many of our joysticks probably met a familiar heroic end, but several events lean more on timing and skill. Archery, diving and weightlifting give it more variety than you might expect from a budget sports game. Zzap gave it 95%, which is a big score, but I can see why they were impressed. It was cheap, varied, competitive and easy to pass around with mates. It may not be the first Commodore 64 sports game people mention now, especially not when you've got the Epix games or even the dreaded Daley Thompson's Decathlon. But as a budget alternative to the bigger names, Hez Games was a very strong Sizzler at the time. Sentinel, not the Sentinel. This one is a synapse space combat game, later appearing here as an Americana budget release. You defend a solar system by jumping around a sector map, taking out enemy ships before they destroy your bases. These bases are incredibly important, as they're where you refuel and repair, and the game adds a bit more thought by making you manage shields, energy, damage, and when to warp out rather than just sit there blasting everything. Brilliant idea. The review points out the weaknesses too, which is fair enough because there isn't a great deal of underlying variety. You warp, fight, repair, refuel, then do it again. I know it was first released for a tenner in 1984, but for a budget £2.99 Americana release space shooter in 1986, the 3D effect, colourful explosions, busy sound and damage systems gave it more depth than you might expect. Zzap's 93% is still pretty generous, but I can see why it impressed at the price. A solid Sizzler, just not as good as the other Sentinel. Slamball is basically pinball inside the belly of a giant monster, which was certainly one way of making a budget pinball game stand out. Zzap clearly loved it, praising the huge scrolling table, addictive play, and the amount squeezed into a £2.99 Americana release. You keep the ball alive, work up the vertically scrolling table, use multiple flippers, bumpers and nudges, and bash the Slamball family before they get digested. Lovely! I could see why it impressed at the time, but 96% feels generous now, doesn't it? Even Zzap only gave the graphics 65%. And when I played it, the ball physics felt a little odd. Maybe Pinball Dreams and Pinball Fantasies on the Amiga spoilt me as a kid. Still, as a cheap, fast, slightly daft C64 pinball game, Slamball is an interesting sizzler. Just not one I'd put within touching distance of a gold medal. Did you play it back then? And what was the best pinball game on the C64? July 1986 was really Leaderboard's month, wouldn't you say? That gold medal was well deserved in my opinion, and I loved it as a kid. Boulder 3 keeps the familiar puzzle action formula going. Hez Games gave us budget multi-event sport. Slamball brings cheap and cheerful pinball weirdness. And Sentinel is a strong enough title. So August then, but no gold medals. It's definitely not short on strong sizzlers though. We have arcade conversions, vehicles, missions, and a few very recognisable names. So even without the shiny badge at the top, there is still plenty here for Zzap to cover, and hopefully for you guys to discuss in the comments. Green Beret. Ah yes, an arcade conversion whose reputation is almost split in two. It's a superb conversion, but with brutal difficulty. It was that balance that made these games superbly remembered for the good and the bad reasons. But there's no denying that this is a classic Commodore 64 title. I mean, the arcade game was no soft touch, but the C64 version feels even meaner, especially when enemies fire at point-blank range and give you about half a blink to react. Good times. That said, it moves well, and the different sections of the bridge, the harbour and the missile base gave it more variety than a basic run and stab game. That's if you ever made it that far, may I add. The special weapons help, although having them on the spacebar does make things a bit lively when the screen gets busy. But that's where we take off one shoe and stab the spacebar with our big toes as kids. Martin Galway's music is a massive part of why people still talk about this version, and the loading screen is especially memorable. For some, I guess the soundtrack will be more memorable than the missions themselves. Zzap gave it 93%, but did you agree it should be rated that highly? It's fast, tough as nails, but very addictive. Just don't expect mercy, and may it be a lesson never to bring a knife to a gunfight. Ceti is one of August's most atmospheric sizzlers. It's a sci-fi exploration and action game, but with far more going on than simply flying around and shooting things. You pilot a skimmer across Ceti III, docking at buildings, searching for reactor rods, managing fuel, shields and weapons, and slowly working out how the planet's hostile cities actually function. Zzap clearly loved this one, I reckon, giving it a huge 93%, with especially strong marks for presentation and graphics. I can see why. The filled 3D visuals gave it a different feel from the usual wireframe games, and it had that serious sci-fi weight you got from titles like Elite or Mercenary. It's not for everyone, and I completely get why some of you might have loaded this one up, got confused and then bounced off it. But if Ceti clicked, then it was a really good game to get yourself into. Kikstart II is one of the clearest Sizzler choices of 1986, and one I'm sure we've all fired up at some point and got truly addicted to. We covered the original Kikstart back in the 1985 episode, and that was already a brilliant little budget game. But this sequel gives the idea far more life, with 27 tracks, split-screen racing, improved visuals, sharper bike control, and the big one, a course editor. That feature changed everything, as not only did you have the built-in tracks, but you could also build your own horrible little assault courses, pretending they are fair and then watching one of your mates launch themselves into a wall. Brilliant! That is value for money, all in its own really, especially for a budget game. Zzap gave it a massive 96%, with 99% for value, and honestly, fair enough. The sound is nothing special, apart from the somehow memorable music from Sean Southern, but the gameplay is superb. A genuine C64 two-player classic, and one of Mastertronic's finest moments. Infiltrator is a slightly odd mix, but that is also why it stands out. You play as Johnny Jimbo Baby McGibbets, which is probably less like an elite undercover agent with a name like that. In fact, he should be barred from choosing his own codename, but straight away you know the game is having a bit of fun with the spy fantasy. 1 minute you were flying a helicopter, chasing IDs and dodging enemy craft. And the next you were on the ground, sneaking around bases, using equipment, avoiding guards and trying not to blow the whole mission by getting caught. Zzap gave it 92%, praising the presentation, playability, and the way its 3 stages work together. I do think some of it looks stronger than it feels now, and the helicopter sections can drag a bit, but I genuinely did really enjoy this as a kid. We had this as part of the Solid Gold compilation, and I remember it having loads of instructions to read, but it was definitely worth it. Check out the individual video on the channel for more of a deep dive. It's worth it, because this was a chunky spy action adventure with plenty going on, and for 1986 that was enough to earn its Sizzler. So August 1986 then was a strong Sizzler month, even if nothing grabbed the gold medal. Green Beret brings the pain, and Martin Galway does a good job of the intro music, even if you do quickly get fed up of being shot, stabbed, and generally humbled. Ceti came with atmosphere and serious sci-fi ambition, while Infiltrator turns up with helicopters, spy nonsense, and a hero called Johnny Jimbo Baby McGibbets, which is a name you won't forget quickly. But for me, Kikstart II was the pick of the month. Simple idea, great 2-player fun, and a course designer that gave it serious lasting value. Was Zzap right not to give it a gold medal? Maybe. It gets close, but not quite close enough. Still, August is a good month. No crown, but plenty worth playing. September is busier, stranger, and a bit more unpredictable. We have sci-fi oddness, medieval competition, adventure creation, text adventures, puzzle satire, and one arcade conversion that was never going to arrive quietly. By this point, Zzap's awards are clearly stretching beyond simple arcade thrills. The Commodore 64 scene was getting broader, and September was about to prove it. Arak was a bizarre game, and I remember firing this one up for the very first time and just thinking, right, so I'm a robot becoming a spider, catching jellyfish, boring through walls and shutting down reactors. Fine. Normal Tuesday. But that oddness is exactly why it's probably in the Zzap Awards in the first place. You start as Arak, a little droid, collecting the parts needed to transform into a spider-like creature. From there, the game opens into a strange arcade adventure, full of creatures, abilities, maze exploration, and some lovely, moody graphics. Zzap gave it 93%, praising the originality, the look of the game, and the choice of a long or short route, depending on how much punishment you fancied. The sound is barely there, and I can see why some of you guys might have found it confusing or frustrating, but Arak had that weird mid-80s daftness where nobody was quite sure what the rules were, including, occasionally, the game. A deserved Sizzler for being different. Ghosts and Goblins was September's big headline, and probably the award most of you remember from this issue. Elite, as a publisher, had taken a bit of stick for earlier arcade conversions, but here they landed one of the Commodore 64's defining coin-op moments. You get the graveyard, the zombies, the armour, the weapons, the music, and poor Arthur being reduced to his pants after one hit, which is funny until it happens every 12 seconds. It is brutal, but that was always part of Ghosts and Goblins, and we'd all agree that this was never a game that had any care for our emotional state while playing it. Zzap gave it a huge 97% gold medal, praising the atmosphere, the music, and how much of the arcade game had been squeezed in. It's not arcade perfect. Well, at least not until the 2015 remake made it so, but for 1986 it captured the spirit brilliantly. Tough as nails, memorable, and absolutely one of the key Commodore 64 conversions of the year. Still kicks my ass every time though, and I just remember the majority of the time running around as Arthur in nothing but his underpants. Night Games was basically a medieval sports day, only with no egg and spoon races. No, think of this as more of a sports day where people get clobbered with sharp metal. Instead of the usual athletics or joystick-wrecking multi-event setup though, you get 8 nightly contests: archery, crossbow, quarterstaff, sword fights, axe, pike staff, and ball and chain. Crunchy. The medieval theme does a lot of the work, and the premise itself was something to get excited for. The events are simple enough to get into, but the one-on-one fights had enough timing, blocking and clanking armour to make them feel satisfyingly meaty. Zzap gave it 90%, just enough for a Sizzler, with strong marks for graphics, presentation and David Whittaker's medieval-style music. It is not as iconic as the Epic's titles, and some events blur together, but as a themed competitive game, Night Games had character. Medieval injury, apparently, was a selling point. The second city was the follow-up scenario to Mercenary, although you needed the original Mercenary program to run it. So yeah, this was basically just expansion content from the original. You are back on Targ, but this time the planet's southern hemisphere has opened up with a harsher red landscape, a tougher city, and a new problem. The Palayor commander's brother-in-law is after you, so I suppose we could call this a game of family politics but with vector graphics. Zzap gave it 95%, with huge marks for graphics, hookability, and lasting appeal. It's incredibly similar, but nastier, trickier, and far more devious than the original. Not one for newcomers who want to fire up a Commodore 64 game for the first time, but if you love the original Mercenary, this was almost essential. A strong Sizzler, and a very clear case of more of the same not being a bad thing at all. The Graphic Adventure Creator was one of September's most interesting awards because Zzap gave a gold medal to a creation tool rather than a game. And I actually like that. It says a lot about the Commodore 64 scene in 1986. Not just here's something to play, but here's something to build with. The Graphic Adventure Creator was a serious bit of kit too, not just some flimsy little novelty. It gave you graphics, multiple commands in one input, full word recognition, locations, objects, conditions, counters, markers, and enough flexibility to build a very involved adventure of your own. Hand on heart, I didn't know what I was doing though, but those who want to give it a try should read through the manual as it's pretty concise. Zzap clearly saw it as a sophisticated and powerful piece of software. I love the idea of it, even if my own version would probably have contained one nice picture, one locked door, and a puzzle that made no sense, but I couldn't even get that far. As for the missing percentage, I think Zzap simply treated it differently from a standard game review. The gold medal was the rating in itself. Jewels of Darkness is level 9 computing doing what level 9 did best, and that was to give you a lot of adventure for your money, even if it did cost a cool £14.95 on release. Maps, notes, careful commands, and with most adventure games, realising the parser wasn't the problem. You were. This package brought together Colossal Adventure, Adventure Quest and Dungeon Adventure, published by Rainbird with added graphics and other improvements. So it's not really one new adventure but 3 established ones polished up and bundled together. Happy days. For text adventure addicts, this was decent value in retrospect. Zzap gave it 92%, with strong marks for atmosphere, lasting interest and value for money, but they had a bigger budget for games than me at the time. If you wanted sprites and explosions, adventures weren't for you, obviously. But if you liked mapping caves, wrestling with commands and feeling awesome when a puzzle was finally conquered, Jewels of Darkness was a hefty, classy Sizzler. Split Personalities takes that old sliding picture puzzle that would infuriate me as a kid and gives it a very 80s makeover. Instead of moving bits of a duck, a steam engine, or maybe a cute doggy, you're rebuilding caricatures of famous faces like Reagan and Thatcher. The game also throws in hazards, bonus items, and the odd bomb or two. That's what lifts it above being just a neat little puzzle idea. There is real pressure and a lot more going on than simply shuffling tiles about. Zzap loved the humour, the originality, and the presentation, handing it 93%. But I can see why. The caricature graphics looked great, the puzzle pieces moved smoothly, and David Whittaker's music gives it a jaunty vibe. Some of the featured faces are obviously a bit time-stamped now, but as a witty, very British puzzler, Split Personalities absolutely earned its Sizzler. Check out the full video for this game on the channel. September 1986 was a strong yet slightly odd month. Ghosts and Goblins was the headline and still feels like a worthy gold medal. brutal, atmospheric, and very happy to leave Sir Arthur standing around in his pants. But the strangest award might be the graphic adventure creator, giving a gold medal to a tool rather than a game, but I suppose it was a change up from the norm. Elsewhere, Arak and the second Ceti brought the sci-fi weirdness. Night games added medieval clanking. Jewels of Darkness gave text adventure fans plenty to chew through, and split personalities turned celebrity faces into a sliding puzzle. A very mixed month indeed. Next up, October, and whilst it has no gold medal, it's still a good issue. This one has horror, shooting, racing, ice hockey, and another game from Jeff Minter. After September's mix of arcade conversions and creative tools, let's see exactly what October had to offer. Beyond the Forbidden Forest brings back Paul Norman's creepy woodland nightmare. It wasn't as polished as the original though, it felt a bit more chunkier, stranger, sometimes awkward in places, but all the better for it. Once again, you're alone in a forest with a bow, but this time you're trying to survive scorpions, worms, bats, a hydra, and the Demogorgon. So not exactly a relaxing walk through the forest with a flask. I gotta admit, it retains that superb moody atmosphere. The shifting day-to-night scenes, the parallax movement, the nasty creature encounters, and that superbly eerie soundtrack made it feel just as dramatic as the original. Zzap gave the sound 97%, and that feels completely justified. Paul Norman was certainly a great musician as well as a coder. The firing system can be fiddly, and it's not as smooth as it is atmospheric. But as a grisly, memorable follow-up to Forbidden Forest, do you agree that it earned its 91% Sizzler? Let us know in the comments. Powerplay was a trivia board game hybrid set around Mount Olympus, where the gods have apparently got bored and decided to settle things with questions, warriors, and a bit of tactical bullying. Very strange setting for a trivia game if you ask me. You have to move pieces around a board. Answer multiple choice questions. Build your warriors and challenge opponents. Get enough right and your piece mutates into something stronger. Get it wrong and you start looking a lot less divine. A nice touch is that you can compile your own questions, so you could make it as clever, cruel or family argument inducing as you liked. Zzap gave it a huge 95% with 96% for presentation. It's unusual, very multiplayer friendly, and much more interesting than a plain quiz game. A clever sizzler, especially if you had enough people around who could survive a trivia question without sulking. Parallax was a very memorable, sensible software game indeed, and I suppose the game design style was right there in the title, and in 1986 the Parallax graphics themselves looked seriously impressive. Add in Martin Galway's music, the moody sci-fi presentation, and that slightly odd sensible sense of humour, and you can see why Zzap took notice. It's not just a straight shooter though. You fly over artificial planets, landing, grabbing cards from scientists, dealing with codes, fuel, credits and all sorts of fiddly nonsense, while the game tries to kill you from several directions. So yes, it looks slick, but it also asks more of you than simply holding fire and hoping. I'm shockingly terrible at games like this usually, but I really got into Parallax. Zzap gave it 93%, with big marks for presentation, sound and lasting appeal. I can definitely justify that, although it can be tough, awkward and occasionally a bit much. But as a stylish Commodore 64 technical showcase with brains attached, Parallax earned the Sizzler. The following Iridis alpha footage contains flashing lights and rapid visual effects that may affect viewers with photosensitive epilepsy. Viewer discretion is advised. Iridis Alpha was Jeff Minter doing what Jeff Minter did best. As we all know, that usually means a shooter that looks bewildering for about 5 minutes, then suddenly clicks and turns into absolute mayhem. It's incredibly clever, this game, and also a little confusing at the same time. You're flipping between mirrored worlds, blasting Xiaxians, managing energy, and trying not to lose track of which side of the planet you are on. Brilliant concept. Check out the video of this game on the channel if you want to learn how it all works. Zzap absolutely adored it, handing out 95% overall and huge marks across the board, with 97% for presentation and 96% for sound. They even called it the best shoot-'em-up on the Commodore 64 to date, which tells you how highly they rated it back in 1986. I can see why though, as it's fast, inventive, colourful, and completely unlike the safer shooters of the time. It's also very Minter, which means some people will love it before they've even played it, just because they are lovers of Minter's work in the first place. If you get into it, Iridis Alpha is a cracking sizzler. Supercycle was Epic's doing a very polished Commodore 64 take on the arcade motorbike racer. It's not complicated either, you just pick up your leathers, get on your bike, dodge traffic, and try not to discover the scenery at 140 miles an hour. What sold this one for me was the sheer speed. I suppose Zzap also loved the sense of movement, the clear dashboard, the track effects, the huge high score table, and the fact it throws you into the action without much fuss. They gave it 95%, calling it an outstanding race game, and the best to date, which was high praise when racing games were hardly rare by 1986. Looking back, I can see both sides. It's fast, slick, and very playable, but also a bit simple once you have got the hang of it. Still, as a clean arcade racer with that Epic's polish, Supercycle was a strong sizzler indeed. October 1986 was a fairly strong month, even without a gold medal. Beyond the Forbidden Forest brought the horror mood and Paul Norman weirdness. Powerplay turned trivia into tactical board game warfare. And Supercycle gave us fast, Epic's racing with plenty of polish. Then you've had Parallax and Iridis Alpha, probably the two most distinctive games of October. Parallax had the tech and Martin Galway atmosphere, while Iridis Alpha was Jeff Minter operating at full voltage. Whether that's a good thing depends entirely on your tolerance for colourful madness. Was there a clear gold medal? I don't think so. Plenty of strong sizzlers, but nothing that completely took over the issue. But November brings the gold medal back, and this time it was a pretty safe pick. World Games brought Epics back to gold medal territory, and after Summer Games and Winter Games, they could easily have run out of steam. Instead, they went global. Weightlifting, slalom skiing, log rolling, cliff diving, caber tossing, bull riding, barrel jumping, and sumo wrestling. Not exactly your average school sports day. What makes it superb is that each event had its own little rhythm, and wasn't just joystick abuse for the sake of it. As I found this game to be more about timing and technique. Zzap went huge with 98%, including 99% for presentation, graphics and sound, and you can see why. The animation, humour, music, event variety and multiplayer appeal are all top tier epics. Solo, it's polished and addictive. With a few of your mates around the telly, it became exactly the sort of Commodore 64 showdown these games were built for. A very safe gold medal, but absolutely the right one. Dander is a licensed game that I'll admit I've got a real soft spot for. My mum bought this for me from the market when I was off school with chickenpox, and considering she knew absolutely nothing about C64 games, it might be the greatest random purchase she ever made. No pressure, mum, but you absolutely nailed this one. The game itself backs up the memory. It wasn't just a famous comic name slapped on a box, it had that Dander atmosphere. The Mekon, the Treens, Stripey, an awesome mission structure and some lovely comic style presentation. I'd love to go into this deeper, but as we're getting through these games quickly, I can only ask that you check out the full video on the channel. Zzap gave it 94%, praising the graphics and the way it felt like an interactive strip. The fighting can be a bit clumsy to say the least, and it's not a massive game, but it has tension, atmosphere, and enough Dander identity to make the license feel worthwhile. A strong sizzler, and still one of the better British comic games on the Commodore 64. Vietnam is one of the heavier entries in November's issue. This is SSI in serious wargame mode. Dry, detailed, and not exactly Saturday afternoon arcade fun, it was made for those of us who wanted a slower, more tactical game with plenty to chew over. Zzap gave it 92% with especially strong marks for instructions, authenticity and playability. That tells you who this was aimed at, and if you like strategy and was prepared to think, there was a lot going on here to be fair. It's a very different kind of Sizzler, but that's what makes these later 1986 issues interesting. The Commodore 64 games were no longer just showing off sprites and soundtracks, they were handling serious strategy as well. Sanxion was Thalamus arriving with all the confidence of a publisher that knew the loading music alone was going to make people sit up and pay attention. And we did. Rob Hubbard's soundtrack is incredibly memorable and pretty awesome. Zzap clearly loved it too, giving the sound 97%. Fair enough, those tunes had more impact than some entire games. Underneath the presentation itself though, Sanxion is a fast horizontal shooter with a clever split display. The main action below and a radar style scanner above showing what is coming before it even hits you. It looks slick, moves well, and the backgrounds give it more variety than your average blast through space. It is another tough game though, but then again, that's because, as you probably know by now, I struggle with shoot-em-ups as it is. I suppose not everyone loved the top and side view setup either, but Zzap gave it 93% and called it one of the year's better blasts. I can see that. Not the easiest shooter, but stylish, memorable, and no doubt one of your favourites. In fact, let me know which was your favourite shoot-em-up on the Commodore 64 in the comments. Trivial Pursuit is a strange one for Zzap, because it's basically a board game conversion, and thankfully that means either surprisingly good or why didn't we just use the board? Thankfully, Dormark made a decent job of it. The aim is the same though, move around the board, answer questions from the usual categories, collect your wedges, and try not to look thick in front of your room. I'd love to live stream games like this, but for the last reason given, maybe it's not a good idea. The Commodore 64 version adds presentation, picture questions, music questions, score tracking, and TP himself, the little on-screen host who manages to be both useful and faintly irritating, which is very on-brand for a quizmaster. Also, what's up with this? Is he having a fit or some sort of temporary spasm? Ah well, it added a bit of light entertainment as I laughed out loud off camera. Madness. Zzap gave it 91% with 98% for presentation and strong marks for lasting appeal. I get it, it's not exciting in the usual Commodore 64 sense, but with a few people playing, I guess it'd work, as long as you were all honest about your answers, when it behaves itself anyway. My version had moments where it was perceived that the quizmaster had been drinking all morning. Good stuff. I think you'll agree that November was a pretty strong month, with World Games being the clear headliner. It's polished, varied, competitive, and exactly the sort of epics games that work best as a multiplayer. Dander was one of the better licensed Commodore 64 games. Vietnam gave strategy fans something meatier. Sanxion brought Rob Hubbard energy and slick shooting, and Trivial Pursuit proved that a board game conversion can work when the quizmaster wasn't pissed. For me, World Games was still the easy pick. Sanxion had the soundtrack identity, Dander had the personal nostalgia, but did the gold medal go to the right game? I'll let you decide. So here we are then, and December gave 1986 a pretty strong finish. There is also a missing score to deal with, because apparently Zzap wanted to end the year with a small admin wobble. Very festive. The Sentinel then was December's gold medal, but this was one of the most original games in the entire video. Again, I cover this in much more detail on its own individual video on the channel. The odd thing is that the original Zzap review gave it a gold medal, but didn't print the percentage rating, which no doubt caused plenty of confusion. But honestly, the missing number almost suits the game, as the Sentinel doesn't feel like something that sits neatly next to a normal score box, as the Sentinel doesn't feel like any other game in its genre. This was Jeff Crammond doing something completely different from Revs. Instead of racing lines and breaking points, you get this strange 3D landscape. Energy, trees, boulders, clones, height advantage, and the constant threat of the Sentinel turning towards you. Brilliant. It's slow, tense, and genuinely clever. Watching, planning, climbing. I remember trying not to panic when the gears started moving my way. Pretty scary at the time too, in a strange sort of way. Zzap's gold medal was absolutely deserved. Weird, cold, original, and still one of the most important Commodore 64 games of 1986. The Sacred Armour of Antiriad was one of December's big lookers. Palace Software wrapped it in a comic book presentation, gave it a post-apocalyptic story, and then dropped you in as Tal, a caveman with a few stones, a grim future, and a very obvious need for better equipment. You're not powerful at the start, and I remember first loading this up and wondering if the wrong tape had ended up in the box. But then the point becomes clear as you're supposed to feel under-equipped. The early game was about surviving long enough to find the armour, collect its parts, and slowly turn Tal from a bloke throwing stones into something that can actually stand a chance. Zzap clearly loved the way it was presented, giving it 97% for presentation and 98% for graphics. The backgrounds, armour design, and whole post-apocalyptic comic book feel give Antiriad real presence. Some enemies are less impressive than the scenery, but as an overall polished arcade adventure with a strong identity, Antiriad earned its 93% Sizzler, a very solid Palace Software release. The pawn was magnetic scrolls making a serious entrance on the Commodore 64. It's still a text adventure at heart, so there is reading, typing, thinking, getting stuck, and me usually blaming the parser when the real problem is that my command was rubbish. But this arrived feeling like a premium adventure package. You got the glossy box, the novella, the graphics, and the mentioned parser that Zzap clearly thought was a step above the usual guess the exact word or suffer routine. The visuals are great too, with detailed landscapes, character portraits, and a world that feels richer than a plain wall of text ever could. Zzap gave it 95%, with 96% for interaction and 97% for lasting interest, so they clearly saw it as a major adventure release. Personally, I always lean towards the Guild of Thieves, for some reason. That one just clicked with me more. But the pawn feels like the important arrival point. Smart, atmospheric, expensive looking, and absolutely worthy of its Sizzler. Bobby Bearing was December's cute-looking isometric headache. You play a little metal ball trying to rescue your family from the metaplanes, which sounds adorable until the game starts dropping cubes on your head, flattening you into scrap, and sending evil bearings over to shove you about. Zzap compared it to Spindizzy, but rightly pointed out that Bobby Bearing is more about exploration and rescue than pure puzzle solving. You roll through a huge isometric world, deal with lifts, traps, one-way routes, and awkward terrain, and sooner or later you realise a map is almost essential. Without one, you are just rolling from screen to screen, hoping one of your missing relatives turns up by accident. Zzap gave it 93% with strong marks for graphics and lasting appeal. I can see why, even if the Commodore 64 version can feel fiddly and slow in places. It's tough, sometimes frustrating, but also oddly likeable. A bright little puzzle adventure, with more bite than its cute face suggests. Trailblazer is another Sean Southern game, and it has that lovely quality where the idea sounds almost too simple, as all you have to do is roll a ball down a track and reach the finish before the time runs out. Then you actually play it, hit the wrong coloured tile, fly into a gap, and realise the game isn't messing about, it's just mega fast. The track is made up of coloured slabs, each doing something different. Some speed you up, some slow you down. Some bounce you, some reverse the controls, and the black ones are basically the game saying, "You weren't using that life, were you?" as you crash straight into a hole. Zzap gave it 93%, praising the two-player mode, the practice options, and the way it turns a basic concept into something genuinely gripping. It's certainly fast, but it's also strange, competitive, and easy to explain in about 5 seconds, which is usually a good sign. A sharp Sizzler, and another reminder that Sean Southern knew exactly how to build a game around one strong idea. Boulder Dash Construction Kit is the final gold medal of 1986, and I suppose it's a fitting one. Boulder Dash was already a classic formula, as many of you are fully aware of from watching these videos. Dig through caves, grab diamonds, avoid falling boulders, dodge fireflies and butterflies, and try not to make one tiny mistake that ruins the lot. The construction kit takes that and hands the caves over to you. You can design your own layouts, set up enemies, build intermission screens, and create the sort of unfair little nightmares that only make sense to the person who made them. Zzap gave it 97%, with 99% for presentation and strong marks for lasting appeal. Like the graphic adventure creator earlier in the year, this is Zzap, rewarding creativity as much as gameplay. If you love Boulder Dash, this was huge value. A strong final gold medal, and a nice way to end 1986 by letting players themselves become the problem. December concludes the video for 1986 with a strong finish. The Sentinel is the big historical one, clever, tense, original, and fully worthy of its gold medal. Antiriad brings the comic book visuals. The Pawn gives adventure gamers a premium magnetic scrolls release. And Bobby Bearing adds a cute but surprisingly tough isometric challenge. Then Trailblazer turns a rolling ball into a panic attack with coloured tiles, while Boulder Dash Construction Kit ends the year by handing the tools over to us guys. A strong final month with 2 gold medals. So that was Zzap 64's Gold Medals and Sizzlers of 1986, and compared with 1985 this year feels much broader. We had arcade conversions, sports games, strategy, text adventures, puzzle games, sci-fi exploration, board game conversions, and construction kits. It was doing a bit of everything, sometimes brilliantly, sometimes awkwardly, but rarely boringly. Some awards still feel bang on, like Mercenary, Spindizzy, Leaderboard, Ghosts and Goblins, World Games, and the Sentinel. Others were easier to argue about, especially the more niche strategy and adventure titles, where my patience level probably mattered as much as the game itself. For me though, 1986 was the year the Commodore 64 library really spread out. You have Lucasfilm pushing ambition, Epix owning living room competition, SSI looking after the strategy crowd, Level 9 and Magnetic Scrolls keeping adventures alive, and people like Braybrook, Cramond, Minter, Hubbard and Galway leaving fingerprints all over the machine. Now I want to know what you think. Which 1986 Zzap award was absolutely right? Which one was overrated? And which game should have received an award but missed out? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want me to continue into 1987, write 1987 below. Thanks for watching guys. Like, subscribe, check out the playlists, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, bye for now.